Him now, and we will take you there when it does happen. In the meantime, let's go to our panel this morning. Labor frontbencher Jim Chalmers and Liberal MP Zed Seselja. Gentlemen, good to see you both.
G'day.
G'day.
Zed, first to you. It's time for this saga around Badgerys Creek to come to an end, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry I'm getting feedback. I might take that out. But Kieran, it is time, and I think Badgerys Creek is the right call. Now the government hasn't yet made a decision, but I think that they should. I think that we need a second airport. Sydney has been crying out for a long time, and if we want to be a government that's about growing the economy, dealing with infrastructure bottlenecks, Sydney Airport is one of those infrastructure bottlenecks. It's a monopoly. It is our biggest city. It is the gateway to Australia, and I think that it's time to make that decision. It would be a difficult decision for some of our members in Western Sydney, though not all of them. A number support it, but I think it's time that the government made that decision.
Jim, what are your thoughts on the Badgerys Creek option? Really, when you talk to people who've looked at this issue over many years, if there is to be a second Sydney airport, Badgerys Creek's the only viable option, isn't it?
Well, I think the case for a Sydney airport's really been made, second Sydney airport, and that it's overdue, really. What concerns us about this particular issue this time is the messiness behind the scenes. There's a lot of cabinet leaking in the Daily Telly today, and you've covered it this morning. A lot of messiness behind the scenes. It's time for the government to make a decision. We'll work with them on when they make that.
Labor could have made the call, though. You were in office for 6 years, only up until recently. So the criticism, is that fair, given Labor's very recent record in office?
Well, we spent a lot of time looking at all the issues. It's not a small thing to build a second Sydney airport, and the Transport Minister of that time, Anthony Albanese, he spent a lot of time with stakeholders, a lot of time getting the studies right, getting all the information together. Through that process, we know that the case for a second Sydney airport's now been made, and I agree with Zed, it's time to get on with it.
And Zed, it looks like it is going to be made by mid-March, so you will have what you're after, and that is Badgerys Creek to be the call. And I suppose it fits in with the broader infrastructure argument that there needs to be, to fill the gap post-mining boom, that infrastructure spend. This very much fits that bill, doesn't it?
Without a doubt. And look, monopolies are really a good thing, and effectively we've got a monopoly there for international travel with Sydney Airport and in our largest cities. So if we're going to get on with growing the economy, we do need to invest in infrastructure, and an airport is critical infrastructure. I think it has been delayed for too long. I think, to be fair, it's been governments on both sides that have delayed it. In a previous life, Kieran, I worked in the Department of Transport, and we would look at these issues, and the studies have been done. They've been done over many years, in fact decades. It's been a difficult political decision, which is why it's been put off, but I think now is the time to make some difficult decisions that are in the national interest, and I believe Badgerys Creek is in the national interest.
Jim Chalmers, just finally on this, I know that one of your colleagues, Ed Husick, he's not the only one, but he's very much critical of the idea. He's worried about no curfew, as there is at Kingsford Smith. But do those concerns, are they outweighed simply by that economic opportunity that Zed has been talking about, in your view, in terms of jobs, in terms of productivity for that city, our largest city?
Yep. Well, I mean, there are a range of issues that hang off a decision as big as this, and Ed is right to raise some of those issues, being a good local member, and he's thought about these issues very deeply, and he's right to raise them. There are a whole range of things that hang off such a big infrastructure project. But as Zed was saying before, there's an economic case to be made. Anyone who travels in Australia understands, or travels internationally, that the case for a second airport's been made. How we go about that, how we consult, how we deal with stakeholders, all of that is the right thing to be thinking about, and Ed's right to raise it.
Let's move now to a related issue, I suppose, with the future of Qantas. Alan Joyce has spoken to a group of coalition MPs last night, basically saying that something's got to give, that there's got to be some sort of government support. Would Labor agree, be supportive of the idea, say, of a debt guarantee, as the Labor government offered the banks in the face of the global financial crisis?
Bill Shorten's made it very clear that we believe in Qantas remaining a national carrier in our country, in our economy. And we're prepared to sit down with Qantas, we're prepared to sit down with the government and work through all of these sorts of issues. We've had a pretty open mind on a lot of these things, including that issue that you've just raised. We don't want to just go off half-cocked and, making announcements this or that day to day on the basis of one Qantas briefing of coalition MPs or not. But we do have an open mind and we do want to be constructive. The thing that's the most important here are the jobs, the Qantas jobs. And it's been a bad few months for the Australian worker, for jobs in the Australian economy, and we want to be constructive about protecting jobs.
I believe we've got a little bit of Christopher Pyne speaking to the members of the media this morning on this issue. Let's have a look at that now.
We need to consider all aspects of how to ensure that Qantas can continue to flourish and to grow. The answer, of course, is not just taxpayers' money. That isn't always the solution. I know it's always Labor's solution, which is why we have a $667 billion government debt if we don't do anything about it. But there are things that we can do to help Qantas, and I'm pleased to see that Alan Joyce himself believes that Qantas needs to take control of their own destiny. Whether it's reasonable for Virgin to have no controls over foreign ownership and for Qantas to have substantial controls over it is something that we need to consider as a cabinet and as a government.
For Pyne this morning, and making the point, Zed, that Qantas is in a different situation to other airlines. It's hamstrung was the word that he used to describe the legislation around it, the Qantas Sale Act and the restrictions on foreign investment. Obviously the coalition sees that as the end game. You want to change the Qantas Sale Act to enable more foreign investment, but in the meantime this debt guarantee sounds like the most likely scenario, doesn't it?
Well, look, it may well. It may well be. I think Christopher's right to point out that we've inherited, forecast $123 billion of cumulative deficits, $667 billion of projected debt in a decade. So we need to be very careful with taxpayers' dollars. And so Christopher's 100% right on that. When it comes to Qantas, there are some restrictions on Qantas that its competitors don't face. So that is something the government should be looking at in terms of fixing it. We shouldn't be into handouts as a general rule. What we should be into is the best possible conditions for businesses to flourish. And there's a strong argument that at the moment Qantas does have one hand tied behind its back in terms of competing. And I think the government should be looking at that and looking at fixing that.
You did, so that's the Sale Act, obviously you're referring to there. Jim, on that issue, you said you've got an open mind, Labor does, on these issues, but not on that. Not on the Qantas Sale Act. Is it time now for Labor to rethink this, given the nature of the modern aviation industry and the competitive, very competitive area that it is, with many of these other airlines actually being state-owned enterprises having a huge advantage over Qantas?
Yeah, Bill's made it pretty clear that it's not our preferred course of action to change the foreign ownership arrangements around Qantas. That goes back to our preference for maintaining something that can be described as a national carrier. He does have an open mind, and the whole team have an open mind on all the other various ways that Qantas is in discussions with the government. That changing that foreign ownership arrangement's not the preferred option for us, but we do come to this in a constructive way and with an open mind.
What's your view personally on that? Do you think that it will have to change eventually on the Qantas Sale Act?
I've got the same view of the colleagues, which is that we do need a national carrier. Qantas has a special place in Australia's heart. And that there might be other ways that we'd be prepared to contemplate helping out Qantas to make sure that it's employing people in Australia, doing the right thing and acting as a national carrier.
Alan Joyce last night also wanted to highlight how much the airline's done in terms of cost cutting and IR reform internally. Is that a message to the coalition that, look, we are getting our house in order, as Tony Abbott put it himself, in terms of businesses need to sort their own problems out before they come to government for help?
Well, look, it's obviously difficult for me to speak for Alan Joyce as to what he's saying, but we do need businesses to get their house in order. There's no doubt about it. Businesses have to do all they can to make themselves as productive as possible well before they come.
But that's pretty clear what he's saying in the wake of the SPC commentary and Toyota, that he's saying that there's very little fat to cut now.
Unless you make chocolate in Tasmania.
Well, it's a very reasonable point he makes. And if Qantas is doing all they can to make themselves as productive as possible, then I think that's a very, very important step, because in the end, it's not governments that run businesses. Private individuals run businesses. They need to do it well. Government has a role in the regulatory framework. That's what we're about, making it as competitive as possible, dropping red tape, lowering taxes, getting rid of things like the carbon tax, which does have an impost on the airline industry. All of these things come together. But he's absolutely right. He has to make his business as productive as possible.
It seems like the corporate sector is getting the message from the government to rein in the excessive costs.
If you're a company in Australia and you ask Tony Abbott for money during an election campaign, you get it. Cadbury got it during an election campaign. If you're a worker in Australia and you need your jobs looked after, whether you're at SPC or Toyota or Holden, the government's nowhere to be seen. Joe Hockey yesterday was falling all over himself to blame the workers for what happened at Toyota. That was a disgraceful thing that Hockey did yesterday. These workers have been told that they don't have a future at that company, that manufacturing of cars doesn't have a future in Australia, and these guys are falling all over themselves to kick workers in the guts.
It's simply not true.
That thing yesterday with Toyota was a joke.
It's not true. He's not blaming the workers.
He was blaming the workers.
What he's pointing to is some facts, and the facts are these.
Well, Toyota said it was entirely wrong.
Well, let's look at what's on the public record.
And I take Toyota's word for it.
Well, let's look at what Toyota did. Toyota in October said they needed to improve their workplace relations in order to have a future in Australia.
And what did they?
Well, this is what they did.
Let's
look at what they did.
Gents, I've got to interrupt. We've got to go to a break, and then we'll come back and continue this discussion about Toyota. Absolutely. Well, we've got a lot to discuss on Toyota. A quick break. We'll be right back.
Looking for a financial services company that's not owned by a bank? IOOF, proudly independent for over 150 years. To find out more, speak with your financial advisor today.
Australia's #1 selling brand. Not available at Bunnings or Masters. Only at your local Still store.
My mum thinks she's tough. She acts like our dog, Harry, drives her crazy. She says, "Here's your dog," and I better not catch the dog on the sofa. But I see her talking to him, cuddling him. She even laughs when he licks her toes in the bath. Ugh. But I know she'd cry if anything happened to him because she never forgets to put his protection stuff on every month. He's my dog, but I think he loves Mum the most.
The Advantage family. We understand each other.
Budget Direct is the proud winner of Money Magazine's Cheapest Car Insurance Award. Due to the massive response to our 20% car insurance discount, we've extended the offer till March 31st when you buy online.
Smarter, cheaper, winner!
Pick up a D-Max deal with pulling power on an Isuzu D-Max with outstanding 3.5-tonne towing. Deals like the 2013 4x4 LSM Crew Cab Ute from just $40K drive away. Plus, we'll throw in a free 3.5-tonne tow bar on all 4x4 models. All backed by our 5-year warranty with premium roadside assist. So pick up a D-Max deal at your Isuzu Ute dealer today. Isuzu D-Max. Depend on it.
It's time to move to a lower home loan rate. And BOQ's new ClearPath rate is lower than the big bank standard variable rate. Visit boq.com.au/compare to see for yourself. These leading manufacturers recommend only Finish as the #1 brand. Now, the best ever Finish Quantum with Power Gel delivers a pre-soak action for an amazing clean and a brilliant shine no one else can beat. That's why Finish is the #1 brand trusted by Australian mums. Finish Quantum with Power Gel, our best ever.
9 out of 10 people believe Colgate Sensitive Pro Relief is more effective at relieving their tooth sensitivity than other sensitive toothpaste they have used. Prove it to yourself. Go online, request a free sample, and take the Colgate Sensitive Pro Relief Challenge for superior lasting relief.
Nature's Own Joint Enhanced Plus Krill combines krill, chondroitin, and glucosamine.
Found a shellfish like this.
It's for joint health.
To keep you moving.
A lot more than just nature goes into Nature's Own.
This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company with me this morning. Zed Seselja and Jim Chalmers. We're talking about Toyota and the debate around it, Jim. The Financial Review, again today, has a former executive chairman of Toyota basically endorsing the Hockey and government view that the workplace entitlements were too generous with Toyota and that it was one of the impediments to that manufacturer staying in Australia?
That gentleman's not with the company anymore. He no longer works for them, and I'd rather take the word of the people who run the company right now. What we saw with Joe Hockey yesterday was a pretty disgraceful thing. He verbaled a meeting, he gave it to the Fin Review, then he verbaled a meeting, and then Toyota took the extraordinary step, and they wouldn't have wanted to do this, to put out a statement saying that Hockey was wrong. And it goes beyond this issue. The Treasurer of Australia should not be going around verbaling private companies, kicking workers in the guts when they're already down about an issue and then have to be corrected by a private company. It was a disgraceful thing.
Don't you think Toyota was correcting more maybe the headline than actually
Joe Hockey went on radio.
But Jim Chalmers, you look at what's happened with Toyota. They actually took the union to court to try and have these conditions reduced. So what Hockey has said, or on the record or not, isn't that endorsed by the actual actions of the company taking the union to court because of the workplace conditions?
Hockey went on radio and backed the report in. Toyota went out and said that the report was wrong. Right? That's the basics of it. In terms of the issue, Toyota went out of its way to say that it wasn't about the workforce. It's a disgraceful thing for the Liberal Party, for Abbott and Hockey and others, when something like this happens, is to blame the workers. If they're looking for blame, they should look closer to home. When you pull $500 million out of assistance, when Hockey goes into the Parliament and dares Holden to leave and sets in train these events that led to Toyota leaving as well, these are the sorts of things that play into it. And you shouldn't be going around pretending and verbaling people and saying it's the workers when it's not.
Zed?
Kieran, well, let's look at what they did. On 31st of October last year, Toyota said they wanted changes to the workplace to improve long-term manufacturing viability in this country for Toyota. They then went and tried to do a deal. The unions and the courts blocked them from going to the workers and having a vote, and not long after, they've chosen to leave. Now, there's a number of factors that went into that, but those are the facts. That's what they did, rather than what they are saying now, what they might be saying now, or what Jim might be claiming that they're saying now. So they tried to improve it in order to have viability.
To be fair to the claim, it's actually Toyota did put out the statement, and it said, "We reject the allegations," is how they put it on the front page of yesterday's.
Well, I think what you're saying in terms of the headline may be the point, but let's look at what they did. They tried to work with the unions. The unions refused to work with them to improve the viability of their business. Very soon after being blocked by the courts and the unions, they're leaving. And this is after getting around $500 million in assistance just in the last few years. So it's not like they haven't had plenty of assistance from the government.
You took $500 million off them.
No, we didn't take $500 million from Toyota. That's just not true. You shouldn't
off the car
make
industry.
assertions.
Off the car industry.
Well,
is that true?
No, $500 million.
You cut $500 million out of auto assistance.
No, we haven't. $500 million.
You have.
Well,
have a look at the budget papers.
We haven't even gotten to that point, Jim. We haven't even gotten to that point where that assistance would have been coming.
Are you saying
we are still at a point.
Cut $500 million?
Hundreds of millions of dollars has been given to Toyota just in the last few years.
One of your colleagues, George Christensen, LNP member, believes that the companies are parasitic and that they should pay back the subsidies that they've received in recent years. Do you agree with him?
Well, look, I would use that language at all, but what I would say is they have received $500 million from the taxpayer over the last few years. That is a massive subsidy, and yet they're walking away. So let's look at why. A number of factors: the high dollar, the cost of manufacturing here versus the cost overseas, high taxes, many of which were put in place by the previous Labor government, such as the carbon tax. All of that came together. But let's not pretend that somehow Toyota didn't try. They did try. They were often blocked by the unions, and I think the unions have to take their share of responsibility.
Do you think, Jim, that there is the possibility that this was the straw that broke the camel's back, as some people have suggested, that the headquarters in Japan said, well, when we're weighing things up, if we've got this approach from the unions, well, we just won't bother with it. Let's just move on. There's a fear there. There's a real risk that was the case, isn't it?
The straw that broke the camel's back was late last year when Joe Hockey went into the Parliament and dared Holden to leave. That set in train a whole series of events, which meant that there wasn't the scale. Once Holden leaves, there's not the scale for Toyota to stick around. That has flow-on implications for components manufacturers.
You think Holden made the decision because the Treasurer dared them to? Come on.
I think
Holden has made it very clear that they were gone.
Nothing
that this government did. We saw Ford make the decision to leave under the Labor government. Is that because of your government? Because it happened under you? Well, let me finish the point then. Because we were told when you offered extra money for Ford that would keep them in Australia, that extra money for Holden would keep them in Australia till 2022, and yet it didn't.
All right, let's hear Jim's response on the Ford point.
They still left.
The difference between us and the Liberal Party when it comes to the automotive industry and the manufacturing sector is we did everything we could. Right? We didn't have meetings with companies after they decided to leave, like Tony Abbott did on Monday night, because he was too busy when Toyota workers were hitting the fence. He was too busy doing a press conference about demonising unions and workers. He met with them after they decided to leave. We put all this effort into the automotive sector, right? And we did everything we could because we preference Australian jobs. What you guys do is you dare them to leave, then you blame the workers.
But is it all the same? But Jim, despite that, is it all the same result? Is there not an inevitability about the whole thing that they were not going to survive in the long term anyway?
I have more faith in the manufacturing sector in Australia than that. I don't think we can dismiss, like Zed has been, cutting $500 million of assistance, daring them to leave, then blaming the worker. That impacts on companies' ability to stick around in Australia and to employ Australians. We shouldn't dismiss that $500 million cut like Zed has been.
Jim, you can do better than that. The Kim Carr view of the world, which is there is no amount is too much to give to an industry, is wrong. And I don't think you should be adopting that. Now, Kim Carr on the left of the Labor Party has been out there saying that just give them more and more and more. Well, it's unsustainable because you tried that. You tried giving them more and they still left. And I think that's the problem. There does come a point where you can't give more, where you've got to say, we've given enough, we've done all we can, and we would love to see the car industry continue, but it has been declining for decades.
Okay, we're out of time. Zed, sorry to interrupt you, but we've got to wrap up. Zed Seselja, Jim Chalmers, thanks very much for this morning, fellas.
Thanks, fellas.
And